Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the 5th episode of By-The-Bywater here for this month in August, as we're all once again dying of the heat, more or less. Oriana earlier proclaimed the weather as trash, but hopefully, still surviving and not as crazy as last time. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good. The weather's here. What I hear is fine, so.
I did.
And Oriana, you?
I spent all of yesterday. I was going to go to the beach yesterday, and instead I was struck by, I don't know if we want to call it inspiration or what. I spent all of yesterday writing, starting to adapt the story of Beren and Luthien for television. Cool. There's no reason to do this. There's absolutely no reason to do this, but I just couldn't not. It's a hot Saturday evening spent doing that.
You were called to the shore by ineluctable seagulls or whatever, but then you had to write out the story. See, it all ties in.
Yeah, exactly. So fun. Maybe we can do that as like a bonus of some kind.
Hey, there you go. Yeah. Well, I was at the, even where I was, the ocean was right there, but in Carmel, that's where I've been for the past week, just visiting family and seeing some friends and things like that. But here I am back. So we are all ready to chat as a quick, not really bonus, but what we were talking about just a little bit before. Stephen Colbert seems to just keep coming up with us here because he is, the Tolkien fan supreme in the public eye, at least. Be able to catch references to Tolkien in both the serious news bit that he had, which was a discussion with Anderson Cooper the other night, and then the more goofy one where he had Lee Pace, who of course played Thranduil in the Hobbit movies, and Lee tried to nerd out on some Tolkien language from the get-go, and then Colbert ran with it. So, out there fighting the good fight. But there's much more to get through this episode. In fact, there is a lot of information we have to get through about Amazon's series. So let's cut to the chase, and we will now move on with the news.
Yeah, so our guess last episode was right. Just a few days after Comic-Con wrapped, Amazon took advantage of this quiet time to post a video on their Twitter for their Tolkien adaptation, and they announced the full creative team behind the series. So besides the showrunners, there's a crew of writers and producers who have worked on a variety of shows, including both so-called prestige peak TV and more genre-oriented stuff. So costume designer Kate Hawley has worked on things like Crimson Peak and Edge of Tomorrow. Crimson Peak is amazing, so I'm optimistic about this now. And their production designer, Rick Heinrichs, is a veteran of Star Wars The Last Jedi, which also looked amazing. So
yeah, pretty promising. And, we're sort of skipping over the writer's room team of credits there. But, Oriana, you were mentioning some names earlier, and it certainly seems like that there's a lot of both talent and reasonable experience brought to bear. What's your take on the writer's room as it was announced?
Yeah, I think it looks great. I'm a big fan in particular of Jen Hutchinson, sorry, there's no N in there. There's only one N in there. But she is great. She has written for Mad Men, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, and she does have like genre cred, I guess you could call it. Not that she needs it, but she was on The Strain, which we also have another Guillermo del Toro little connection there. So there's people who were on like Fringe, which was great. Everyone should watch Fringe. I don't know if it's still on Netflix streaming, but it's a genuinely really great looking staff of people, and it gives me great hope. And there's a couple other things that are very promising is illustrator and concept designer for the show is John Howe, who with Alan Lee, they were behind the look of the Peter Jackson versions of Tolkien's work. So there's going to be some visual continuity, I think. and together with Kate Hawley, I think like this is all just very promising.
I think Hal as is kind of a, dare I say, an unexpected choice. I mean, there was absolutely no reason that either he or Alan Lee, for that matter, would necessarily be called in. I mean, especially if the idea was to sort of go over fresh. I'd like to hear from Hal about, like, was he approached? Did he approach them? What the exact work of how that worked out. I'm not surprised necessarily that Lee hasn't gotten involved. He always seemed a little more all in some respects with the Jackson team, and he's also not to put too fine a point in it, and he's older than Hal by a few years, I believe, and he may just be like, I've had my fun and things like that, so I've done well, and it would be interesting to find out if Hal is going to do what he did, with the Jackson Productions and actually fly out there and be there on site, or if he's going to be more of a remote designer or start going things in and working it that way, which he may want to do as well. I'm sure we'll find out. But yeah, Kate Hawley, kind of to step back to her a bit before we address other things. I know, Jared, you were really thrilled about the fact that she worked on Crimson Peak and Edge of Tomorrow. Could you say a little more about your impression of her, like how she is as a costumer? What sort of grabs you about her work based on that?
Well, I actually haven't seen that many movies that she's worked on, so I've seen obviously Crimson Peak and Edge of Tomorrow. I'd have to bring up her actual IMDb page to see what else she's done, but she's a really good, thoughtful, thorough designer, like Crimson Peak. Which is one of my favorite movies of recent years, is so intricately put together visually, and she's a huge part of that because the costumes in that movie are incredible and just say so much on their own that I think she's a really good fit for this.
And I was thinking that given Hal's input for the Jackson films on things like how armor works and things like that, I'm thinking the combination of him and Hallie, will make a certain really stand out there too. Any further thoughts on Hal from either of you two's involvement?
I just can't wait to see. Like, I'm just waiting with bated breath to see what will be different, what won't be different. How will they incorporate wood into all of the set designs? Yeah.
Okay, so about that, I really don't expect them to, just because I don't think they're going to be that adventurous. And using wood that way visually would be a really adventurous choice, especially for a gigantic production with a lot to lose. So I wish they would, but I doubt they will.
And for those who might be wondering what that's about, that's why you got to be listening to all our episodes.
Every single one.
Yeah. Preceding episode, the one on Aldarian Horrendous, this subject came up, so there is a relevance. So, and besides Hal's involvement, of course, there's someone else, if you want to talk more about that, Oriana, who's involved with all this.
Yeah, to keep everyone in line will be Tom Shippey, who, so the production put out a video, as Ned said, sort of going through who is going to be part of the team to put this together, and Tom Shippey is credited as Tolkien scholar, which is a bit of an understatement. He's he had an academic career studying Old English that was like very much in the following sort of Tolkien's line of work, and he has been a regular critic and defender of Tolkien for like half a century at this point. Think of key books like The Road to Middle-earth and J.R.R. Tolkien, author of the century. But what I love about this is, like, as soon as the video came out, as soon as this is all announced, Shippey immediately gives an interview to a German fan site that I feel like I'm going to mess up this pronunciation, but it's Tolkien Gesellschaft.
Gesellschaft, I think. So you were close.
Thank you. My German is non-existent. So, so he sort of laid out, and it wasn't necessarily that we didn't know this already. Like, we already kind of knew that the TV series was going to be, was going to take place in the Second Age. I think maybe it might have been a bit of a surprise that this was because the Tolkien estate has said, no, like, all you can use, you can only do the Second Age. You can't have anything that is part of the narrative of the Lord of the Rings in particular. So that's kind of funny to me because Amazon spent $250 million, $250 million on the rights, and they're only allowed to use. But Shippy says that apparently the Tolkien estate, like, they have veto power on everything. However, they are supposedly giving the writers a lot of leeway in terms of creating new characters and, sort of coming up with their own.
Like Tyra.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
let's talk about Tyra.
Let's talk about Tyra, indeed. Yeah, so we'll talk a little more about some of Shippy's comments there, but it does lead into the fact that while there has been no actual specific "yes, this is who is cast" information, there is a tidbit that has broken that one person is under discussion. This was courtesy of a Variety exclusive, and this was a couple of days before the Amazon video was posted, and there's been nothing else since. But Australian actress Markella Kavanagh, I believe that's how she pronounced her name, just another Kavanagh, who has appeared in a variety of productions, such as the recent reinterpretation for Netflix, I believe, of Picnic at Hanging Rock, is in talks to join the production as a character who doesn't share a name with anyone in Tolkien's writings, called Tyra. So cue the Middle-earth's next top model jokes. But per a report on the Tyra was one of 4 names used for characters in audition scripts. Those things where they're just testing out people to see if they'd be a good fit, play this role, do that sort of thing. And there's no specific note that this is a final name yet, or even if this particular character in the audition script is even going to be used. That's still unknown at this point, although I'm sure the production has it very much in mind. And as Oriana mentioned, Shippy was clear, and this is the exact quote from him, that the production has a relatively free hand when it comes to adding something, since very few details are known about this time span. But again, and this is the exact direct quote from Shippy on this, is that ultimately the estate is, quote, quite capable of saying no. They retain a veto over everything that concerns Tolkien. So mixing this casting news with Shippy's sort of like role of, I don't want to say gentle enforcer, but clearly he's, keeping this in mind. And I really do think he's kind of the back channel guy who, will say something like, probably don't go this route. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think both about that and the Tyra news? I can't say I know Kavanagh's work at all beyond just a, quick mention of some of her stuff. So I have no impression of her. And I know it's been a couple of weeks. I should at least look up a clip. But any thoughts on any of that?
As a Seattle person, I really, really want to watch the Tolkien estate fight them to the death. I know it won't happen, and it's not really related to anything Tolkien specific. I just want somebody to take Amazon on in whatever capacity and win. So that's where I am emotionally.
Just show them that they are not the only power in this world.
Yeah. And I don't know that would actually happen. I have visions of like Amazon being forced to back down from stuff. I don't know. I just want something to happen.
But you don't want Tyra.
I don't want Tyra. I don't want Tyra.
I just don't know. I mean, I could get away with that maybe as a Hobbit name, maybe, but even that's a stretch.
Yeah,
so.
Linguistically, it just doesn't mesh with it. But like, as from the get-go, I was like, this is clearly a pseudonym. Like, and it might not even be like the sides that they wrote for. I'm guessing they wrote sides specifically for the auditions, and that are probably not going to be part of any actual script. This project is just too big. There's too, like they do this stuff for Doctor Who, and whatnot. So like genre shows in particular, I'm not too worried that they will actually name her Tyra. I think, it may be, maybe she is, Taran Kalime, like, or something. And I don't have any, good luck to her. I've never seen her. I hope she's great. Rooting for her success.
Yeah, that's about all we can say really at this point. There was one other thing I just remembered too from the Shippy interview that kind of ties in with the mention earlier about how they can't really get too much into Lord of the Rings specifically. There's a flip side to that. Shippy specifically said that the estate has said to Amazon that the First Age is completely out. In other words, no Silmarillion, at least not at this stage.
Give it to me. Give it to me. Give me The ability to adapt the Silmarillion, please.
Wouldn't it be fantastic if they're like, we gave Amazon we got 250 million from Amazon, we're good. We just charge you $1. Like that. Then you'd be like, yes, I'm set. So on come the day that Oriana gets that, that's one of those things I'd love to know more about. And as far as I know, there is no information about, at least publicly, about whether these rights were as all encompassing as maybe we thought they were. It could be maybe more of a parceling out, like you're getting this and that's all you're getting, and all that. So, and I think it'll be interesting. The other thing that just leapt to mind literally just now, and I think we mentioned this before, is that this is not the only big, huge project that Amazon is doing as a fantasy thing involving the estate of a dead author. And that, of course, is simultaneously, and in fact, there's been more news on this in terms of casting. They've announced cast members for Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. And getting into that would go well beyond what we have here. But the thing to note is that they, too, have a very protective estate, and that estate has also been burned. There was famously a weird phantom half-hour thing. You know what I'm talking about. That happened a few years ago.
I loved
it. Was like screened. It was like filmed just to hold on to the rights, almost like that weird Tolkien adaptation animation thing from the late 60s that happened. That's a whole story in and of itself, just to hold on to some rights temporarily. And the estate, when it was broadcast once on TV, and people were like, hey, it wasn't even announced. What's going on? And it was like the adaptation of literally the first page or two of the very first Wheel of Time book. And the Robert Jordan's estate had a complete cow and all the rest of it. So all I'm saying is, that's its own story. I'm sure there's plenty of discussion on other podcasts or things focusing on that. It's just very interesting to me that Amazon is taking on two now very, very incredibly careful estates, and doing adaptations. Like, you better keep in line, because I'd love to see these two team up and go like, let's destroy Amazon. They've screwed it up completely.
It is really funny. Like, Amazon wants its tentacles in everything, and it looks, it's not a surprise, I guess, that they're going after literally the most high profile adult fantasy properties that they could. The His Dark Materials, I guess, technically is YA, but that also, I'm sure, was tied up well before Amazon was like, oh, we need to get in on this. And I think honestly, most of the money Amazon shelled out for The Lord of the Rings was literally for the title. They were like, we don't care what material we have access to, just give us the title. I mean, this is pure speculation on my part. But it would, that's the value, really. Or to certain business people, I think it's, brand recognition is the ultimate goal for them.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, completely. We could go on, but I'm sure there'll be more speculation. And I'm guessing from this point on in, we're going to get monthly news on this thing. We're going to get more. The floodgates are opening, and we'll be talking about both casting news and, I'm sure, initial photographs or rumors of things. Plenty of times now, but things that are gearing up into gear. But let's wrap up here for now, because it's not just about whatever Amazon isn't or isn't going to do. It's about what we're talking about. And so let's move into Oriana takes the lead this time, moving into the main topic.
Oh, yes. It's time. It's time to talk about Galadriel. So, you're probably already picturing her as soon as I said her name, right? She looks like Cate Blanchett, because she was just such an indelible performance in the movies. She is a pivotal figure throughout the entire legendarium. She's like the only substantial good guy in the Lord of the Rings who's been around since the First Age. But who is she? Who is this lady? So like a quick, brief history. Galadriel was born in Valinor, the Undying Lands, Aman, special place where the semi-gods are during the years of the trees, which is the good times. Just, she is the only daughter of the House of Finarfin, and she had 3 brothers, including Finrod Felagund, who is my personal favorite elf. And her half uncle, I believe, is the relationship there. Fëanor was inspired by her hair to make the Silmarils, the most beautifulest, specialist jewels in all the world, and that inspired like insane amounts of bloodshed and horror. But he noticed that the light of these two wonderful trees was caught in her hair and very beautiful. Galadriel wasn't super a fan of Fëanor, but she did really, really want to leave Valinor for Middle-earth. And she was part of the massive exodus of high elves back to Middle-earth, even when Fëanor and some of the others killed some of her own kin, which is interesting. So she gets to Middle-earth and hangs out with Melian, who, if you don't know who that is, why you listen to our
episode 3 of the podcast. Yeah.
It's a great episode. She is so interesting. But then, after Galadriel gets to Menegroth, which is where Melian and her husband Thingol live, we don't hear a whole lot about her for a long time. She kind of drops out of the narrative. We have when we meet her in The Lord of the Rings, she is Queen of Lothlorien, but we have no idea when she ended up going there with her husband Celeborn, or even when she met Celeborn, because in the Silmarillion it says she met him in Menegroth and that he was a kinsman of Thingol and a Sindarin elf. But there is a later version of the story in the Unfinished Tales where he's one of the Teleri and they met in the West before leaving for Middle-earth. We'll put a pin in that for right now. Because when we meet her in The Lord of the Rings, she is married to Celeborn, who we know almost nothing about, and she is already in possession of the Elven ring Nenya, and she is the mother of Celebrian, who is Elrond's wife and Arwen's mother, and she refuses to take the One Ring when Frodo offers it to her, and then she leaves Middle-earth with Gandalf and Elrond and Frodo, and Celeborn doesn't go with her. Her husband just doesn't go with her, and it's strongly implied that they'll never see each other again. And you may be wondering why. It's a great question, and one that you'll never ever get an answer to. Sorry.
It's not one of the great romances
right?
of Middle-earth.
Yes, it's this other. Well, okay, so we'll get back to that. We'll put a second pin in that. She does. Correct me if I'm wrong, but she feels kind of similar to Melian in some ways. When we meet her in Lothlorien, she is very much this sort of mysterious fairy queen. Lothlorien itself feels sort of like a traditional fairyland. There is this suspension of time, or seeming suspension of time. There is this supernatural beauty. You don't know a whole lot about Galadriel. She talks a little bit about her history, and it's actually contradicted by what's in the appendices like a few hundred pages later, which is what is so interesting to me about her. Is her murky history gives us an insight into the unceasing creative process at work behind the scenes here. Like literally in the last month of his life, Tolkien was working on this different history of Galadriel. It's the version in which Celeborn is one of the Teleri and they meet not in Middle-earth. In some versions of the story, she is mother to a son called Amroth, who is king of Lorien. But in other versions, she isn't. In the final version that we read in The Lord of the Rings, she is not the mother of Amroth. And, her story, probably more than any other, is the one that was most consistently being altered, being played with. Let's actually start with the Galadriel and Celeborn. What do you guys think is up with that? Because to me, it seems like they are this married couple. They're like the married couple who isn't, like, you're not sure why they bothered to get married in the first place. Like in The Lord of the Rings, she is constantly correcting him and talking down to him. And it feels like this is a consequence of them not having a settled story. But what do you make of them?
I mean, to be honest, part of it is the not having a settled story thing, but I also wonder if Tolkien, who, as much as I love him, was not like the most woke person out there. I genuinely think he could not quite conceive of a woman exercising power on her own.
Yeah.
All the most powerful women in the legendarium are married.
Yeah.
To lesser men.
Yes.
But as we keep coming back to, but I mean, Galadriel of all of them feels very much like she could have done without a husband.
Yeah.
I mean, Melian and Thingol love each other. That's the origin of their story. That's why Doriath exists and all that. But Galadriel just kind of has this accessory. just like,
oh my god,
and that's it.
Celeborn as accessory.
He's a trophy husband.
He's like a purse.
He's a real elf on the shelf. Take him down when need be.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the real reason. He was just like, well, she's got to have a husband.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the fact too that he's Celeborn the Wise. Really?
No, right? It's such like was that a troll? Was that a joke?
That's just because he was the wisest person before she came along, and they keep it as a courtesy title.
yeah, I can see it now. Galadriel the Wise.
Yes. Well, and it's really interesting because there is in this much later version of the story of Galadriel and Celeborn, Galadriel is actually Galadriel and Celeborn were the ones who started the sort of mini kingdom-ish of oh god, how do we say it? Is it Eregion?
Eregion.
Okay.
Said it, yeah.
Thank you. Oh my
It's always a hard G.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. They were the one. It was like they arrived there with Celebrimbor, who is a son of Fëanor, who abjured his family's awfulness. But and Celebrimbor is the one who made the Elven rings, and couldn't see that Sauron was Sauron. But there is in this later version there is a sort of love triangle between Celebrimbor, Galadriel, and Celeborn. And I'm like, oh, I really would have loved to have seen this. Not least of which because Celeborn just seems so boring. Like I said, like Jared, you said, he's window dressing.
You have to wonder if he's mentally checked out or something like that. I mean, if you wanted to be generous to the character, their daughter left a long time ago. So, maybe he's felt that he's lost something anyway. To explain, by the way, for folks, Celebrian, their daughter, who is also Elrond's wife, Arwen's mother, as Oriana mentioned, there's a subplot which is never fully developed but is discussed, where she is captured by orcs and held in torment for a couple of years. No further details than that. When she is finally rescued, she says she has to leave Middle Earth. Essentially trauma writ large. She's literally getting out of this world, and that happened thousands of years ago, or it's hundreds of years ago in the thing of Middle Earth. And it's not trying to say we have to read too much back into what we see of both Galadriel and Celeborn in Lord of the Rings, but you could almost argue, it's sort of like, how does backstory filter in? But this actually leads to another point, not to take over the discussion. This is something to throw in. My sense of it is that one reason, I'm guessing, why things are so unsettled for Galadriel is that she makes a striking introduction, essentially, to the whole legendarium in Lord of the Rings, if I remember right. That's where she does first appear. And it's almost sort of like having created this very, very compelling figure who is, almost literally set on a pedestal, almost. Yeah. It's sort of like, for good or bad reasons. It's sort of like Tolkien's like, what do I do?
Yeah.
How do I work with this character? And I think the unsettledness, pitching that back over to you, Oriana, what do you think about that in terms of what Tolkien was trying to do?
I think that's exactly right. And I think it's interesting that it didn't seem like he could decide. So why is Galadriel still in Middle Earth in The Lord of the Rings is like, a very key question to her character is, she left, she was part of the exiles, but they were pardoned by the Valar after the defeat of the great enemy and were allowed back, and Galadriel doesn't go. And there are a number of different answers to this question, and they all kind of hold similar weight. One is that she was not actually pardoned by the Valar, that she was deemed too proud or too, she messed up too badly somehow, I guess. And the other is that she was given pardon but refused it, but that's never completely explained other than just she is proud and enjoys having her own little kingdom to rule. Which one do you guys think is more compelling and more true to the character? I know.
Jared, you want to take that one first?
I think the version where she refuses pardon makes a lot of sense, because what we see of her in the published work, like the Silmarillion, is that she's kind of secretive. Her reason for leaving Valinor is explicitly like, I want my own thing to rule. And so she goes through this process of like really, really learning what she's lost. And then by the time Frodo comes along and says, "You want the ring?" she's able to say, "No, I kind of want to get out of here." Which is why, she passes the test, and the test wouldn't be set for her, I think, if she didn't have this thing in her past that she had to learn to overcome.
That leads me to think that, sort of to tie in with why it refused, more thoughts on this, it was that we've been sort of not dancing around the subject, but we probably should, get to, the killer scene, which is the Mirror of Galadriel scene, Hey, we're finally talking about something Lord of the Rings in detail. Who knew? So, but that's the point. There's so much out there. So, but it's obviously, such a central, it's one of those memorable scenes in the entire book. And he clearly, the reason why it's so often played for a huge dramatic moment in any of the adaptations is precisely because it's a huge dramatic moment. It's practically a monologue. When she goes through all that, and there's this sense of, I would say, to answer your question, Oriana, this sense of sort of a bloody mindedness, I guess is the best way to put it. Stubbornness, if you want to call it that. But I think it's something more than that. And I think what we see in Tolkien's attempt to sort of explain this character after the fact, in the writings that only emerged, again, after he was dead, was sort of like, I have got this incredibly fierce character here. What do I do? And what he's done is he's created something that he has to explain why the character is so fierce. And so this sense of like, domains of their own, etc. I think we can tie that into, of course, Tolkien's own idea of, what is power. Yeah.
Subcreation in particular.
Right. Yeah. Just sort of like, holding on to things, all that, trying to claim things for one's own. And there's a lot more sort of kicking around my head, but I can't quite find the words for it. Maybe I'll come back to it in a bit. But the sense of surrender, you could say, to something inevitable is, again, the passing of the test, as she says. So you get the huge moment, and then she says that I will diminish, and that's a very, very interesting choice of word. Diminish, go into the West and become Galadriel, which incorporated, of course, into the film, the Jackson film, very clearly. That to me is sort of a key line. It's almost sort of like, on the one hand, you could say it's like, a character is humbling themselves, and you can read into what you want with that. But at the same time, it's not just her doing that in Lord of the Rings. In fact, it's rather more. It's extremely interesting. In fact, you could argue it's incredibly interesting that on the one hand, Gandalf way earlier in the book is like, "Oh no, please don't tempt me. No, go away." Whereas Galadriel's sort of like, "Oh, it's right here. I'm going to handle it."
Yeah.
And all that. And you could say you could argue she might even be the stronger character in that regard.
I totally concur. And I think it's interesting too, going back to like the idea of relinquishing, we see that over and over again in Tolkien's work, which is, men must relinquish life. The Númenóreans must relinquish their long lives. It's about not being too attached to the world, even if you are, as the elves are, literally like, body and soul tied to the world. Like she exists actually almost as a thesis statement. Like, am I crazy?
No.
Feel free to say yes. But yeah, no, she like, particularly like I Ned, you bringing it up, I hadn't thought of this before, but the line that says, I will diminish and go into the West and remain Galadriel is so interesting, because you would think that diminishing would mean not remaining Galadriel. But in fact, diminishing is the crux of remaining Galadriel. One could argue that it was unnatural for, not like because she's a woman, but it was unnatural for her to seek these, to seek dominion, to seek rule. And it's her learning, her arc as a character is learning to diminish. And that it's not truly diminishing, it's simply remaining yourself.
And there's something interesting there, too, in the fact that suggests that she has to learn a lesson, whereas, again, we don't know too much about him because he is such a shadowy character in his own right, and that would be Celeborn, is that, is he wise because he already learned that lesson, but given his own unsettled background of a story, that's something interesting. In terms of Dominion, I'm reminded of something, and when I was rereading some of the unfinished Tales material, was the part that I had completely forgotten about, that Christopher Tolkien suggests is pretty much key to the story as Tolkien had developed it, which was that they hadn't been there, though they'd been on the other side of the mountains in Eregion, they actually hadn't been in charge, let's say, of Lorien until fairly recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
They had spent time like down in Gondor, essentially, and then just sort of in the Elf Haven there, and they were just there for a couple of thousand years, just chilling.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting place to be. It's sort of like, okay, Gondor's all around, and all this stuff is happening. What are you doing? Hi. Just a very odd sort of suggestion.
Well, I think that whole thing in itself is really interesting as part of this progression that she goes through, because she comes to Middle Earth because she wants to rule her own realm. When they come to Lorien, depending on which chronology you're following, Amroth has been the king of Lorien, and then he leaves and dies or something, and the people of Lorien are like, can you just be in charge of us now? And she doesn't. She and Celeborn are explicitly like, we're not going to be your king and queen. We'll be the Lord and Lady of Lorien. We're just kind of holding it. So she's already kind of on a downward trajectory from like being a ruler to being a caretaker. And then from there, it goes to no ring for me, thanks.
Yeah, it is interesting that she comes to Middle Earth and then never really has a kingdom.
She never achieves her dream.
No. It's so weird. And it is like, yeah, I still can't get over like why she married this drip Celeborn in the first place.
I loved being reminded, quite frankly, and this is one of those cases where Tolkien clearly dodged a bullet, where apparently the original form of Celeborn's name is, and if you know what I'm talking about, and for you folks who are listening, your mind is about to be blown. I am not kidding you. It's spelled exactly the way I'm sounding it, teleporno. And he apparently came up with this in like 1950s, if I remember right, or it's just an early version of the name. Thank goodness he,
because is that the Quenya form of the name?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank God he was like,
thank God for rough, rude Sindarin in comparison.
Yep.
Apparently.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yep. I mean,
wow. I mean, my other favorite bit is that apparently, like, one version of the story is that Celeborn's father is named Elmo, and I'm like going,
I mean,
it does, it works within the, like, it would make sense for him for this character to have a name that is similar to Ulmo, which is the Lord of Waters. But like there are so many names that are so good. Like I like Aldarion is a wonderful name. Arendis is a wonderful name. But some of them, yikes. We were just talking about this, Saranto and Teleporno, and oh god, it just.
Well, see, we got lucky with Galadriel. Boy, did we get lucky!
Yeah,
what an evocative name. I mean, we could really talk about that. Maybe to bring up a point, this is something you had mentioned earlier, Oriana, not in our discussion, but just some of your notes, and I'd like you to talk about it more. The hair and how she reacts with one person acting with her hair and someone else asking for her hair.
Yes, so her thinking her half uncle Fëanor is a creepy weirdo is it's just it's not like said in the Silmarillion or anything. It's very like kind of sketched in other sources. Fëanor was like, before he decided to create the Silmarils because of her hair, he was so enamored with her hair that he like kept badgering her about like taking a lock from her. He was like, can you give me some of your hair? And she's like, no, you weirdo. And kind of stalks around being like, can you believe this weirdo wanting my hair? And then though, 3 ages later, I guess, someone else asks her for a lock of her hair. Gimli, son of Gloin, is like, not to be a weirdo, but I would treasure a lock of your hair. And she's like, yeah, you know what? You're cool. So what do we think happened here? Do we think that it was personal growth, or did she really just hate Fëanor that much? What do you think is the difference between the two?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. It isn't that he asked for a lock of hair, right? He just asked for a single hair.
Yes, a strand.
Yeah, and I think that right there may be the difference. It's sort of like
Fëanor. I think it was like I don't think Fëanor was asking for like a whole hank. Like I think it really was a few strands. I don't think he was. I mean, it's still weird, but yeah.
I bet Fëanor just didn't ask nicely. I think he probably asked in a way that was very like, "Gimme your hair," and Gimli is like, "Oh, great lady, please, if you could condescend to."
But that actually ties in the sense of veneration that you're bringing up.
Yes.
There's so much of that. I mean, I already made the pedestal joke, but
it's true.
this. I mean, hey, but I mean, this sort of ties in, or we can even talk about how Cate Blanchett was wearing those platform shoes for the adaptation.
Yeah.
So, but
right, she was.
But on a more serious note, something that occurred to me again reading through this is just my take was Tolkien's Catholicism and sense of intercession. I don't know if you want to, either of you want to sort of dwell more on that, because I think she sort of serves is it a saint role? Is it an angel? I mean, I don't know.
It's a very sort of Virgin Mary role. Like she even gives them bread that is divine. And I think there's some letter or something where Tolkien is like, yeah, the lembas is definitely significant. Yeah, I think it's more of a Virgin Mary kind of thing that's happening here, where she's like, she is divine, noble, knows lots of stuff, and offers sustenance and help in time of need. I don't think it's quite a saint kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm not Catholic. I wasn't raised Catholic. Different flavor of conservative Christianity. But
Oh, you were?
Okay.
I was. And yeah, it does feel very much, she is the one that you turn to in your darkest hour. And where do they arrive in their darkest hour? Lothlorien. I do think it's interesting too, going back to the history, like if we think about Aragon, if we think about, like, I don't know how the timing would work exactly, like because Galadriel is like told Sauron to screw off when in the Second Age, when he was coming around like pretending to be a good guy, whereas Celebrimbor is like, oh hey, cool, you can teach me stuff.
A dude with gifts.
Yeah, like I'll take your gifts.
And didn't Tolkien himself in his notes pretty much say it's sort of like I don't know why she didn't warn anybody or something like that, which is sort of like, boy, that's passive aggressive.
It would be really funny if she just like was like, what, if you guys can't figure it out, I'm not going to help you.
Well, does it say that she knew who he was? Because my impression was always like she was kind of going, oh, I don't know about this guy.
No one really knew who he was, because no one had ever really connected all of the bad things that Sauron was responsible for. I think a lot of people thought that he just did the Isle of the Werewolves or whatever, and like that was it. And he had all these different forms and different positions of power in the reign of Morgoth.
In Hell's hierarchy.
Yeah, it was.
This sorry to interrupt. This makes me think of sort of an underrated power of hers, something that you can tell that Tolkien probably wasn't totally, I don't want to say comfortable, but wasn't sure about systematizing, and that's her sense of like looking into your soul. And this sort of sense of communication across distances,
yes,
which was conveyed a particular way in the film versions. But setting that aside, not merely the sort of the one-on-one encounters or discussions that she has when the Fellowship first meets her, and how afterwards everyone's sort of like, wow, I felt really uncomfortable, like so she was like and just and everyone sort of says they can't quite articulate how they feel. But I'm also thinking about her in the Mirror of Galadriel scene, where she's sort of like basically telling Frodo and Sam, who's sort of admittedly not totally following along by his own admission, where she only tells Frodo as an audience member that still the door is shut, a big dramatic gesture off towards the east. And, who is that for? It's not really for Frodo. I mean, yeah, I would say it's almost like an actualization of things. It's interesting because it ties into your point, Oriana, about how she is the fairy queen. This is something beyond the ken of even dwarves or other elves. It's something at a higher level.
Yeah, she is very, particularly in the movie, and I think, again, it's an indelible performance by Cate Blanchett, and I'm interested to see how the Amazon show handles Galadriel, if at all. Although, but like you kind of have, she is around, and she does tie. Like, I feel like they need to tie with Elrond and Galadriel. Like, those are going to be. They're like, hey, remember these folks?
They're part of the story too.
Yeah, we swear. Sorry, we can't get, Hugo Weaving and Cate Blanchett still looks basically the same, but, they've kind of aged out of looking ageless.
How does she do that?
I don't know. Well, yeah, we do know, but, and it's not Nenya, the ring of, I don't remember which one it is.
Adamant. The ring of water.
But wait, where was I going with this? I don't remember.
Well, her sense of psychic outreach, or however you want to describe it.
This is very, like, she is very inscrutable, very mysterious, very aloof, and it really feels like, because so much of the Lord of the Rings proper does not feel connected to fairy story at all. And she is the element. I think that he was like, I am going to get this element in there by hook or by crook, and ended up creating like an incredible character because he needed this, like, cause even, well, I guess the scenes with the elves when when Frodo and Sam are still in the Shire are kind of fairy-esque. But it's a very light touch, whereas this is like full on, magic as hell.
Although not, because
it's not.
Magic
it's
is.
Not. You would call this magic, but
and
for me, it's a
weird
Tuesday
moment too. Yeah. That's so weird. Where she's like confused by hobbits being like, "What are these wonders?" And she's like, "I don't know what you're talking about, dude.
It's just my house."
What elves do. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting. This just occurred to me. I can't say I've ever dwelled on this thought, but I suppose it's a weird sort of way how language, where language fails.
Yeah,
which is interesting in Tolkien. That for all that the story is, of course, written in English and all that, you get this sense of someone saying something that someone else just doesn't quite understand.
Yeah.
And there could be a wider point behind that. It could just simply be just just a turn or an indulgence, but maybe there's something more to it than that. No,
I think that was actually what I liked most. The thing that I loved the most about it is it felt like it was a translation from a different language, and there were these sort of there was stuff being lost in translation, and rereading it is always an effort to bridge those gaps, and delving into the lore and the other languages that were created for it is an effort on my part to get into to bridge those gaps.
And I'm thinking how, it's interesting that, of course, we're seeing this through Frodo's eyes, because I'm suddenly flashing back, thinking to your mention of Elrond, about how in the Council of Elrond, Frodo is literally astonished and taken aback to realize that Elrond, remembers the war against Sauron, and and all that, and that's someone you get a sense from him as like, wow, this person is impossibly old in a way that I almost can't literalize. And then Galadriel's even more so.
What if Elrond, but more?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he knows Elrond from Bilbo's stories, and he's like, oh, he's this guy who just hangs out and gives you dinner. And then
true.
No, wait, he was part of all this.
Yep.
He's actually important.
Yeah, putting it. It's definitely, I love that. But here's the thing that this will probably be, this is a good sort of thing to end this topic on is do you guys personally have creative projects that you have worked on for most of your adult life? Is there an ongoing thing that you are constantly refining, going back to, like the story of Galadriel and boring Celeborn. Celeborn. Sorry, I can't stop harping on this.
I do have things I've been refining for years and years and years and changing backstories and things like that.
Why?
And it's a why?
Yeah, I mean, I know why, but like for you in particular, why do you keep what keeps you going back?
Part of it is I don't know when to quit.
There we go.
These long-running things are a useful way to track how you're thinking about the world, which I didn't know when I started them, because there's one thing in particular I'm thinking of. I started when I was like 16 and had probably just read the Silmarillion and was like, oh my God, you can do this? And the things that came out of it during that time are very much informed by how I thought about the world when I was 16, which is not how I think about it now. So I go back and I look at that and I go, oh, okay, well, let's fix this. So I don't think there's anything equivalent to Galadriel where there's like this one specific backstory that keeps ending up like shifting in time, shifting on its axis or whatever. But these things are interesting enough that like I care about them and I want to keep working on them. But it's also because I no longer agree with the premise of whatever this thing is that I've got to like rejigger it, bring it more in line with who I am now. I hesitate to say that was his own process, but it would make sense to me, given that he did keep going back to, like, famously with orcs being like, well, are they sentient beings? Do they have free will? Because he was so bothered by what he had written when he was younger that he kept trying to make it make sense to him.
Yeah, I don't have anything like Jared's work to compare to in that regard. I am a little more like yourself, Oriana. I have, I try and create moments that are short and then I'm done with them, and then to one degree or another I move on, referring mostly to my writing work on music for the most part. There's something to... Maybe the closest equivalent is coming back and reinterrogating your own taste, kind of like the way Jared was saying. So, how you look at things. To my mind, this is something that maybe because of the age I am, I'm not sure. Maybe this is something that I've escaped where it might not be as something that people around your age or younger can escape, for the simple reason that social media wasn't around. That's reductive. That's very reductive. But what I mean by that is that, a lot of my thoughts about, let's say music, but also literature, movies, stuff like that, were formed, for the most part in the late 70s through the 80s. As I grew up and became, late teenager, by the time it was 1990, I was 19 years old. But my formal writing as such didn't start until after that. Now, of course, there are younger thoughts, and frankly, what I try and do every so often is look back, say about 20 years, which is when I really started writing for professional publication on a national level on certain acts. And there are acts who I've very much gone there. I've gone off. There are acts who I feel very about, precisely because of things that have come to light about them since then, things that I either didn't know or didn't fully appreciate. And so there's a certain sense of self-editing. At the same time, the work is out there, and maybe even contradicting my own point. Even though what I wrote, again, pre-social media, even at that point, is still now out there because, the internet is forever not true, and yet partially true. There's work out there that I tend to regard more in I could sort of phrase that better, or we could talk about that better. Maybe the closest comparison, though, could be to the band who I've always described as my favorite band of all time, My Bloody Valentine. True. I mean, if there's a lodestone in terms of, okay, my taste has turned and this is the road I'm on, it was clearly hearing them for the first time back in 1990, etc. I could go on, and I have, at great detail, in many different places over time. But I don't think I've come up with an exact summation in my brain about how I regard them or how I think about them or my relationship to them and what they did. I've done my best over time, but I'm never quite satisfied. I don't think I'm going towards a final point of going like, there, I fixed it. I think it'll just always be something that's sort of like, I've got these thoughts, and I can look back at them and go like, yeah, I accept that, but it's still not enough. It still doesn't quite get it. And so to tie back to your question, Oriana, and therefore the question about what Tolkien was doing, it could be that in a much different sense, because of course this was, I'm talking about, receiving the artistic, receiving the artistic product versus, and who knows how Kevin Shields, the main guy of MBV, feels about his own work. You often get a sense from him, he's never quite satisfied with his own work in turn. Tolkien is in that stage. He's sort of like, I've got this thing. Do I get it right? And I think the fact that you brought up that he, was working on it up until the month before he died, to my mind, that shows a sort of like, I still haven't got this right. And I tie that in with those last few years when he was almost questioning everything about what he had done. It's just one last little outreach of that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. No, it's interesting. So, I have come to appreciate both, trained as a journalist, worked as a journalist for 14 years at this point. Oh, my God. But, and I loved, or I actually kind of needed that. I need deadlines. I need a hard, it has to be out in the world by this time. You can't keep writing and rewriting. And it's interesting now that I am sort of pivoting to sorry, there's a thunderstorm, I guess, happening. Didn't expect that.
Manwë is letting himself be known.
Yes. But I now am starting to move into screenwriting. Jesus, that sounds so pretentious and dumb, but I'm taking right now I am taking some material that I wrote 10 years ago and turning it into, it was a novel, and I am turning it into like a TV series. And the difference Jared, what you were saying about the way I viewed the world and the way I told stories then and the way that I look at the world and tell stories now is just like, it's absurd, the distance between the two. All of the characters in this novel, all of the main characters are men.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah.
Why did I do that? And so now it is this ability to correct, because, no one actually saw the novel. Or I think 10 people saw the novel. No one will ever see the TV series either, but I will know. So I can appreciate that instinct to constantly re-examine your work, even if it is published, and go, okay, how can I fix this? How can I improve this? How can I, everything is just a draft, creatively, even if it is published, even if it is put out into the world. If you are that kind of person that Tolkien was, everything is a draft.
Mm-hmm.
The end.
Yes, no more.
No more. Yeah. So I don't know. That's my thoughts. Oh my God, I can't wait to hear what Jared's topic is.
Oh yes, it's that time. So main. We're wrapped up. So we got to look at the next topic. It is Jared's choice. What is it?
I want to talk about friendship.
Nice. That's cool.
Friends.
Because so Ned, you had sent that article from the Mary Sue about the friendship represented in the Tolkien biopic.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, friendship, specifically male friendship, because, whatever, is such a big part of Tolkien, but it's so different from the way we see it represented in other media nowadays that it's a really fascinating thing in its own right, and I would love to talk about it. So
yes,
yeah, friendship.
I love it.
Yeah, that's nicely cross-cutting. It's clearly something that you'll say more, of course, but the fact that the role it had in his own life and how he translates that into his creative work. Wow, yeah, no, I'm looking forward to all the angles. This will be great.
We have so many angles.
Right, yeah. I mean,
can't wait.
And the great thing is that, yes, Frodo and Sam, although arguably, is that a friendship or is that something else? On many different levels.
Well, that's one of the interesting things. That's why it's such a cool topic to pick apart, is that the friendships are so multi-layered and ambiguous that... Anyway, save it for the episode.
Yes. Oh my God, yeah. I can't wait. Yeah, definitely, immediately I'm thinking of the annoying TBS TNT ad campaign for The Lord of the Rings, where they were playing like secret lovers over like Frodo and Sam. Yeah, it was a gay joke that was like dumb on literally every level. There was no level on which it was like an okay thing to do. Yeah, it existed. I'll have to find it on YouTube or something.
Yeah, I'm going to look this up.
Yeah.
We'll link it and say, like, don't actually go here, but here it is.
Right,
Don't give them any traffic.
Yeah. Ugh. Oh, boy. Well, something to ponder for next time. But, again, great talking to everybody. Wonderful chat as always. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here?
I love Galadriel.
Love Galadriel.
Yeah.
She's amazing. She's a great character. And if you haven't sensed by now, Cate Blanchett, yes, and all that. So I retain questions about how she was used in The Hobbit, but there's many different things in the Hobbit movies.
They don't exist. The Hobbit movies don't exist.
We may have to give in at some point, and that would be something. Even if it's like, think of it this way: I can pretty much predict. I can see us doing individual episodes for Jackson's Lord of the Rings films. We'll probably do The Hobbit in one episode, and it may be short.
No, we'll say it's one episode. We'll stretch it into 3.
Oh God, Lindsay Ellis will be proud.
It's one of the Hobbit movies are actually like, it takes so much time to pick apart all of the ways in which it doesn't work. Sorry to everyone who put in so much effort and love and care into making it. I'm sorry. That
raises a good point. I love the documentaries around the making of those films.
Oh, yeah, those are fabulous.
But the films. But anyway, off track, and that would take us a few more hours. So anyway, we're wrapping up here. So until next month, we'll talk to you soon. As always, show notes to be found on the site. Information in our outro about how to contact us. Any questions and things, and we'll talk to you all next month. See you soon. Thanks again for listening to this episode of By-The-Bywater. Please subscribe and rate us via your favorite podcast listening options.
Episodes and show notes are at megaphonic.fm/By-The-Bywater, all one word. You can also message us through here. Email us at bythebywater@megaphonic.fm or follow us on Twitter at By-The-Bywater.
You can also follow us individually on Twitter and ask questions there. I'm at Vandroid Helsing.
I'm at Schwinter, SCHWINDTER.
And I'm Ned Raggett, 2 G's, 2 T's. By-The-Bywater is a proud member of Megaphonic Podcast Network. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. We hope you join us again next time. Until then, Namarie.